Hey, good morning, everybody. I am really excited to finally publicly announce the formation or launching of a new course. It's going to be called How to Be Married. I am not particularly claiming to have all the answers about being married. I am married myself, married for 5 years, so I'm learning a few things along the way. But I'm coming at it more from a place of the integration of Catholic truth, Catholic teaching, 2,000 years of unpacking what the sacrament of marriage is really all about, with clinical experience of dealing with a lot of broken marriages and helping people restore their broken marriages to a place of healing. So the course, you can see the link here in the post. So you can sign up on that page for more information. I'll be announcing the specific launch date. Also, we're going to be launching with a huge discount on the course because not all the material is going to be included right away. I have a lot of the backbone done, and then I'll be fleshing it out as we go along. So you purchase a full course up front, but then it's going to continue to grow, hopefully continually. So it's only a one-time purchase price. It's not like a membership or anything like that, but it will be something that grows in value as time goes on. What I want to do today, actually, right here, is read an email that I got. So I asked people to send me an email, and you can still do this if you have particular questions or issues. Send me an email to drgreg@catholicpsych.com, drgreg at catholicpsych.com. And I was just really curious what people want to hear about in a course. I have my own ideas of what goes into the course, but like I said, this is going to be a growing, resource. So I got a really powerful email back. One particular point or question that this person wanted me to expound on. And so I want to read that. I asked her for permission to share it, and she said yes. And so it's going to be actually part of the course, and I'm going to give more of an answer or some explanation and teaching on the content. But so I want to share that right now. She writes in and says, "My husband is Catholic, but your average Catholic with average level of CCD instruction. I went to a Catholic college and studied theology, and I'm much more into church teaching, etc. Miraculously, we were both virgins when we got married. However, in order to keep his virginity, which he knew in his heart was the right thing to do, he used masturbation and occasional pornography to keep his raging testosterone under control. He didn't think he was doing anything wrong, but trying to do the right thing." By the way, I did put a disclaimer in the description here, but this is obviously mature content. So if you're watching with your kids, maybe come back to this a little later. "When we were dating and beginning to talk about getting engaged, I brought up the fact that I would want to use NFP. He was very overwhelmed by it, and he could understand the idea of not wanting to use hormonal birth control for health reasons, but didn't understand why we couldn't use a condom or just do mutual masturbation on fertile days. I began to explain to him the entire idea of theology of the body. This is when I found out about his masturbation, and we came to a very literal crossroads in our relationship. I basically gave an ultimatum that it was marry me with NFP or not marry me at all. I know, sounds harsh. And after a grueling few days, he agreed to NFP and to stop masturbating. While I'm very grateful for his heroic choice, it has also caused so much pain for both of us. Engagement was literally a living hell. After that behavior for 10 plus years, his whole stress and sexual energy coping mechanism was gone, and it's still something he's working through, trying to figure it out. 4 years later, at first he just had to shut everything down completely and be really distant from me emotionally and physically. Then he would try to be close to me, but always frustrated and emotionally ugly and in physical pain. An entire year and a half of this was exhausting, to say the least. It was and is a constant battle of me standing up for my belief and what I know God wants for us, but making someone absolutely miserable in the meantime and appearing to them like I was simply the Gestapo for all the church rules, and someone who refuses to compromise. Pair this with my own wound of anxiety and rigorism and legalism, and it was a deadly combo. I would have panic attacks over the gray areas, and definitely didn't show him mercy or attract him to the faith through joy and peace. I so wish that I could have met him where he was at, but I was also terrified of sinning mortally. I wanted to throw every NFP self-help book out the window, because in every single one of them it says the number one thing for the man to do are prayer and confession, which is great. But what happens when your man doesn't really pray personally and doesn't believe in confession? When he doesn't believe in all the church teaching and he has a huge mistrust of the church? When he thinks that the masturbation rule was made up by men and not Christ? When his CCD teacher told all the boys in middle school that they would go blind if they masturbated and therefore made most of them tune out the church forever? I literally couldn't find help anywhere. Even priest and confession for myself were either completely unhelpful or completely in the dark about what couples really have to go through with NFP. A huge mistake during engagement is we kept saying and hoping that we just had to make it to marriage. When we got married, everything would be better because at least he could have sex. Ha! Our first 1 to 2 years of marriage were almost harder than the engagement, because now he's on a roller coaster ride of sexuality. Although my cycles are regular due to my anxiety and some other physical factors, stress can make my cycles really long. And up until recently, he absolutely refused to have sex pre-peak because he's absolutely terrified of having a child before he's ready. I mean, like panic attack terrified. And we really can't have a child yet because of our life situation. When you factor in my long and heavy cycles, we're looking at about 1 week a month when we could actually have sex. And then I really don't feel like it. With his terror of having a child too soon, even though the science says I'm not fertile, he still feels panic every time we engage in this intimacy. So he's either angry and frustrated or nervous and anxious. Sometimes he's just plain depressed and turned off in defeat. It's in these worst moments of abstaining when he blames me for how our relationship is, for forcing him to do NFP, for turning him into an irritable mess, for trying to control him, for taking away his manhood, for never being sexual with him, etc. He would always criticize the me and the church and just spew frustration and anger. A wonderful, kind, and decent man will turn into a literal crazy person. It's like there's no blood in his brain and he becomes both irritable and barely functioning. Whenever we get into an argument, even if it isn't about NFP, he always brings it back to this. The amount of resentment built up in his heart breaks mine. Anytime I ask him to compromise on something, etc., it's always brought back to, well, you made me do NFP, like a trump card. Yet at the end of the day, once we've reconnected physically, he always apologizes and says, of course, he would never ask me to compromise my faith and do something I didn't believe in, and that he's proud of me for sticking up for my beliefs. His big thing is he just wishes we could do this mutual pleasure on the fertile days, and doesn't understand why that's not showing love also. It would make our relationship so much better. He tells me, point in the Bible where he says you can't do that. How is this something Jesus taught? Are there psychological reasons for why specifically mutual masturbation isn't good? You can imagine how I feel after weeks of fighting, years of fighting, and I have to suddenly flip a switch and engage with him sexually. I become so shut down and guarded, mixed with my already non-existent libido, that it has taken me a very long time to be able to really open up to him and receive him, not just physically, but emotionally in that moment too. He has a very Hollywood version of how women are supposed to be. He went into marriage expecting that I would be turned on to him all the time. He thinks that I'm rejecting him when I'm not sexual towards him. But most of the time it's either because I'm exhausted or stressed or just because I simply don't trust his sexuality sometimes. I can tell when he's coming from a place of love and a place of lust. And based on his history, I get very guarded. He doesn't think there's much validity to that, but I know in my heart that there is. So where are we at now? I receive some help on my own. I've learned little ways to try to be a little bit more sexual towards him, to try to not be as frustrated. And of course, I pray. But a big part of it is that as we near closer to the end of these life circumstances that keep us from being able to have a baby immediately, and he's not quite as nervous about having children, so the anxiety is lessening. There's a lot more openness, and therefore I'm starting to be more attracted. We have really reconnected lately, which is beautiful in an answer to prayer. He's come a long way in learning to deal with this frustration, and he's come to accept NFP. But we do still fight at times, especially now that we've set up the communication pathway. We just so quickly flip the fuse and go there into those bad habits. Thankfully, it's not as bad as it used to be. So this is first of all, the reason why I wanted to share this question, testimony, is because it's such a common story. A lot of people listening right now, if there's any men listening right now that might be thinking like, uh-oh, my wife wrote in. That's because a lot of marriages experience this pain. This is not talked about enough in the church, especially not when you're learning NFP. I mean, I feel like I want to put this out there publicly, just to keep, just write out the testimony and have it out there, because I think a lot of people will relate to this kind of pain and suffering that comes with this experience of the sexual relationship in marriage, of intimacy. So there's so much here that we need to unpack. On a very basic level, superficial level even, it's, these are communication issues. So we do talk about communication in the course. But this is much deeper than just a communication issue. I mean, these are issues of faith and a deep understanding of why the church teaches what it does about natural family planning and about sexuality. So there is a component of the course, a few modules actually, on theology of the body. And what is needed here is a real deep and thorough explanation and understanding of theology of the body. Theology of the body is the way to understand how the sexual relationship is not ordered towards sexual pleasure. In other words, sexual pleasure is not the point of the sexual relationship. It is a wonderful and happy byproduct and sort of co-occurrence that goes along with the sexual relationship. But it's not the point. It's not the goal. It's not the reason for its being. Okay, so we have to understand that and move away from that mentality, because that's what our culture, the media, most of the time the way we've been raised in our education or being not educated has led us to believe. Without being educated during the time of psychosexual development, we're left to being taught by our peers and by the media, which are both obsessed with pleasure. So of course we're being educated in this sort of mindset of sexual relationship being ordered towards sexual pleasure. And it's just simply false. And it disorders and disorients our experience of sex and how it is actually a unifying experience between a husband and a wife. Now, and again, I'm not saying, because I've heard people say the church only says it's for procreation. The church does not say it's only for procreation. It's for the unity of the married couple. But that does not mean it's for sexual pleasure. Sexual intimacy opens up the capacity for the deepest kind of unity between a husband and a wife. For the most part, I always have to qualify, because the deepest unity between a husband and a wife was between Mary and Joseph, and they did not have a sexual pleasure and intimacy in their relationship. So I always have to throw that in there. But for the most part, for most of us, the sexual relationship as a form of bodily communication, bodily communion, the sharing of self one with the other, the reciprocal mutual gift of self through our bodies, that opens up the pathway towards deep unity. So that is the primary goal and end of marital intimacy. So we separate that from pleasure. When we understand that, we say, okay, how does sex unify a couple? And that is through this lens of theology of the body, understood as imitating, imaging, being like the love of God. So the greatest, deepest, infinite unity that exists in all of existence is the unity between the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. And so the more we make the sexual relationship like God, like the love of the Trinity, the more we enter into the path of union. And so that's where the qualities of God's love need to become the qualities of our love. And so that means that we learn how to love with free, total, and faithful love every time we engage sexually. And as a consequence, as a result, every act of love is then fruitful. Even if a baby is not conceived, it's still fruitful. That's a whole nother thing I talk about. It's, sometimes people think free, total, faithful, and fruitful are these four so-called pillars of the theology of the body. It's actually a little bit of a misunderstanding. There's 3 pillars. I guess you could say 4 pillars, but it's kind of like a tripod. There are 3 qualities of love that then lead to the 4th quality. So free, total, and faithful love always leads to fruitful love. And the fruit of marital intimacy is the primary goal of marital intimacy, which is union. So the first fruit of a free, total, and faithful love is the union between the man and the woman. And in that union, you also have the deepening of union with Christ. So I'm kind of throwing a lot out here, but I'm giving a little bit of a blueprint of what's actually, fleshed out much more in the course. But when we mirror God's love as free, total, and faithful, therefore we open it up to being fruitful. Now, with mutual masturbation or any other sex act that's not the full gift of self in full completion and between the man and the woman, the way that it's meant to be is an image of God's love, we take out one of the legs of the tripod. So that marital embrace does not image God's love. Therefore, the whole thing falls, and then the fruitfulness goes away, which is the unity. So a marital embrace that is not imaging God's love is not fruitful. And that fruitfulness is primarily unity. Now, here's another point. This is also why fruitfulness does not equal a baby, because you can have an act of sex that creates a baby, but it doesn't mean that it's fruitful in this deepest sense. And so we see that all over the place, out of wedlock, babies and babies conceived in rape or just babies that are coming into a marriage that is unhealthy and not a real love marriage, not built on the image of God. So, and that's where disaster strikes, and it becomes a point of tension and, deep conflict, all sorts of problems. I can't tell you how many marriages are living this way, are experienced this way. And so that's why I said I wanted to read this testimony, because I'd say this is, if I had to put a number on it, I would say that 50 to 75% of marriages are in some way related to the points that are written about in this testimonial. Really, honestly, maybe closer to 75. And if we just talk about a general misunderstanding of NFP and theology of the body, that moves up to like 80%. And so, the point is we need to accept our calling as being made for greatness, being made for union with the divine, being made for reconnection with God. And he loves us so much that he made it pleasurable and he made it enjoyable. And while he made it difficult, he made the benefits and the fruits and the rewards far, far greater than the difficulty or the sacrifice that's involved. So I encourage you to to look more deeply into how these principles are present in your marriage or not, and look for ways to purify your own heart so that when you're approaching your spouse, you're approaching with more faithfulness, with more freedom, and with a greater fullness and totality of your personhood, so that you bring all of yourself to that embrace. That requires vulnerability. It requires authenticity. It requires honesty. It requires self-knowledge, because you have to know yourself in order to share yourself. That requires a lot of work. This is not easy. So a lot of times people, sort of just have sexuality as sort of like this other part of their marriage, and they just kind of do their thing over there, and then we go back to our normal life, most of the time. And you don't realize that you're holding back a lot of yourself. You're ignoring some feelings that you have. Maybe you feel slighted. Maybe you feel like you're not the primary focus of the sexual embrace. You're worried, or you wonder if your spouse is thinking about somebody else, or maybe thinking only of himself or herself. Ways that you're wounded, you're not sharing. Then you're holding back. You're actually the one guilty of not imaging the love of God by holding that part of you back when you don't bring those things out in the open and talk about them openly. Or maybe you're wondering and worried that you're being selfish, and maybe you wonder if your spouse feels that way. We have to talk about it, have to open up, have to have the vulnerability, have to have the trust. So that's where communication comes in, because if you're yelling at each other about cleaning up the kitchen after dinner, how are you going to really be comfortable talking about sexual intimacy and the vulnerability of feeling wounded because you feel like the other person's being a little selfish, or maybe you're wondering if you're being selfish? Just little examples like that. So anyways, these are the kinds of things we talk about in the course. We go really deep. These are topics that many people have probably heard about, but when it gets to the intimacy of the bedroom, not a lot of people are talking about the realities. And so that's what I want to try to bridge the gap between what's talked about publicly and what's actually experienced, personally and privately. And so if we can, with reverence and a sense of safety, not trying to sort of rip open the veil over something sacred, but with reverence approach these topics in ways that can help all of us grow in holiness and happiness, so that we could truly be flourishing and really discover what we're called to through our marriage, realizing that most of the people think of marriage as miserable, and that's not what God made it for, and that's not the potential. And we need to be able to proclaim to the world the gospel truth that marriage is made for us to be happy, so that we actually can be happy, and that if we're experiencing the kind of joy, it's got to be permeating everything about us, so that that's what proclaims the gospel to the world. So let's be happy. Let's be joyful in our marriages. I can't tell you how happy I am in my marriage, and it's not because it's easy. It's not because it doesn't come with a lot of hard work, a lot of hard conversations, a lot of difficulty along the way, but I can't imagine being any happier in my life. And so I want to be able to share that with the world. I want to share that with you, and I want to help in whatever way I can to connect these dots between psychology, Catholicism, and our faith, and just the way that we live in our private lives, and what's really going on behind closed doors. So anyways, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Put them in the comments here. Shoot me an email, drgreg@catholicpsych.com, or certainly click on the link here in the description to sign up for the marriage course. I'll be letting you know when that gets released, and also be starting off with a pretty huge discount, so that you guys can help me. It'll be kind of like a pilot launch. You guys can help me add content that will make it the best course possible. I think if we're involved in marriage ministry, marriage prep or different ministries in the church, it's really hard to not walk away with a feeling like something's missing, or there's more that's needed. And that's because these programs, which are doing awesome, are trying to fill a gap that's much deeper than just any one marriage program can fill. We're going back to like catechesis, like is talked about in this testimony here. Like, this is everybody's experience of CCD. CCD catechism in grade school is just not hitting the mark, and many priests are not hitting the mark in their preaching, and many seminaries are not hitting the mark in informing their priests. So we have a lot of work to do. In any way possible, that's what I'm trying to do. That's the mission of the Catholic Psych Institute, and that's my personal goal. So help me to attain my goal by giving me some critique, telling me what works, what doesn't work, and I'm really just happy to be engaging this material with you all. I pray for you. Please pray for me, and let's get to holiness, and let's be joyful in our marriages. God bless you.